Hi guys, today I'm going to be showing you how to make this winter hat, and you can make it whatever color you want. You can even make it into a Santa hat if you want by using red and white. To make this exact hat, you're going to need 182 bands for the top part of this hat, and if you want to add this dangling part to your hat, you're going to need 56 extra bands. So let's get started. For my first row, I'm taking a single, twist, double, and we'll cover 20 pegs. You can make whatever color pattern you want for your hat. I'm doing a pink and purple striped hat. Single, twist, double. I'm going to do 2 rows for each color. We're going to cover almost all of the pegs on our loom, except the last 4 pegs on both sides, because we're going to come to the center pegs. Single, twist, double will come from the 5th peg from the bottom diagonally on both sides, like that. And you should have 20 rubber bands covering 20 pegs up and down your loom. Now take a single band and we'll cover the 20 pegs. We're going to loop the bottom bands up and over to the center, leaving 2 loops left per peg for all 20 pegs. Just go around your loom, pulling the bands on the outside and pulling it towards the center. Remember to only pull the bottom bands up, and what we'll be left with is 2 loops per peg. That was row number 2. Let's push it all down. For row 3 and 4, we'll do the same thing, taking 20 single bands, covering 20 pegs, and looping the bottom 2 bands up and over. And I'm going to use pink. You can start anywhere on your loom, just looping a single band onto your loom on each peg, and then looping the bottom 2 bands up and over. I'm going to fast forward because it's pretty repetitive. Row number 4. Before we go to row number 5, we're going to reduce. We're going to take a single band off of the second peg from the bottom on the sides that's attached to the first peg and moving it to the third peg. So go on the side, pull a band off, and I see it's attached to the third peg. I'm going to hold it, get the other loop off. It's attached to the bottom peg and moving it to the third peg from the bottom. Reattaching this one to the second peg. So now the third peg has 3 loops and this has 1, and we're going to pull these 2 loops off and moving it up our loom like that. Repeat for the other side, same thing. Go to the second peg, make sure that loop is attached to the first peg and then moving it to the third from the bottom where we have our bands looped. Now this one has 3 loops, this one has 1, and we'll go ahead and move these 2 to the second peg from the bottom. So that would be the 2 for the 6th peg from the bottom. And now we'll move these 2 loops off of that center peg and attaching it to this center peg. So the 5th peg from the center, from the bottom. So the bottom of our loom is done. Now let's reduce the top. Same thing, we're taking a loop off of these 2 pegs that's attached to these 2 to move to the 3rd peg from the top. So grabbing a loop, check to make sure it's attached to the 1st peg and we'll move it to the 3rd. Now the 3rd has 3 and this has 1. We'll move this one to the 2nd peg. Now the 2nd peg has 3 loops. Repeat on the other side, pulling that loop off, and it's connected to the 3rd one. We do not want that one. We want to pull the one that's attached to the 1st, moving it to the 3rd, reattaching this loop back onto the 2nd peg, and then pulling these 2 loops off to move it to the 2nd peg from the top on the side. This has 3 loops, this has 3, and then we'll move the center 1st peg bands down to the 2nd center peg. Now we're down to 16 pegs. For rows 5, 6, and 7, we're going to take a single band, 16 of them, covering the 16 pegs, and then looping the bottom bands up and over, leaving 2 loops left per peg. I'm on my purple, and I'll do 2 purples and then 1 pink for row number 7. So I'm going to fast forward. Once again, this is pretty repetitive. That was row number 7 for me. And if it's getting too tight for you inside your loom here, go ahead and pull the center of our hat up so that way we have room to work with. Push everything down on the pegs, making sure it doesn't come off our loom. Otherwise our hat will unravel. So that was row number 7. Before we go to row number 8, we're going to reduce to 12 pegs. And once again, we're going to repeat the same reduction process. We're pulling a band off of the second peg from the side, and it should be attached to the first peg. And I pulled this one off, it's attached to the third, so I'm going to pull the other band off, or the other loop, and looping it to the third peg from where we have our bands on, and reattaching the first one, and then moving these two loops onto that second peg, or the third peg from the top, the very top. Repeat on this side, moving a single band off, and I see it's attached to this peg, so we'll move it to the third peg from this peg, and then moving these two loops off of the first and onto the second, like that. And this one has 3 loops, so that's this one for both sides. And then we'll move these 2 bands off of the second peg from the very top and moving it down to the third center peg. And let's repeat on the bottom side, same thing. We're going into this second peg from the bottom where our bands are on, grabbing the loop that's attached to the first one, and this one is, and we'll move it to the third one up, and then moving these 2 loops off of this peg and onto this second side peg. And now these 2 has 3 loops, these 2 has 3. Repeat on the other side, same thing, check to make sure this loop is attached to this one, which it isn't. I'm going to grab the other one and pulling it up to the third peg from where our bands are, and re-looping this back onto the second peg. Now this one has 3, we're going to move these 2 loops onto that peg. Now this 2 has 3 loops, and then we'll move these 2 bands off and looping it onto that peg there. So now we should have a total of 12 pegs that's covered by our bands. For row number 8, we're taking 12 single bands, looping it around our loom. Make sure you push the bottom bands down, and then we're going to loop the bottom bands up and over to the center. Because we reduced, this one has 3 loops, we're pulling those 3 loops up and over, and we should have 2 loops left per peg after we loop the bottom bands up. So make sure after you've done every peg that you have 2 loops left per peg. Push all your bands down, and that was row number 8. We're starting to reduce our hat. Now for row number 9, we'll reduce it to 8 pegs. So we're taking a single band off of the second peg here, and I want to make sure it's attached to the first one, which this one isn't. So I'm going to move the other band off. It's completely off that one peg, and moving it one down and putting this one back on itself. So now this has 3, this has 1. We'll move these 2 loops off and attaching it to there. Now this has 3 loops and this has 3. Repeat on the right side, same thing, taking a single band off. Check to make sure it's attached to the first one, which mine is, and we'll move it down to the 3rd peg from the first one that has the bands, then looping these 2 down to the 2nd peg, like that. Now these 2 does not have any bands, it's all down here. This has 3 loops, this has 3, and we'll move this center peg down 1. If you hear the banging, I believe it's from my neighbor. I'm not sure what they're doing. So let's do the bottom of our loom, same thing. We're going to move a single band off of this 2nd peg, and it should be attached to the 1st peg, and it is, and we'll move it to this middle peg. So this middle peg now has, or the 2nd from the top, has 4 loops, and then we'll move these 2 bands off completely off of that peg and looping it onto this peg, which now has 3 loops on it. Repeat for the other side. Same thing, taking a loop off, checking to make sure it's attached to this one, which it isn't, so I'm moving the other one up. Now this 2nd peg from the top has 4 loops, reattaching the other one back onto this peg, pulling these 2 loops off of this peg and moving it up 1. So now this has 3 loops, this has 4, and this has 3. And finally we're moving these 2 loop off of the center peg and moving it up 1. And we're down to 8 pegs. Push all your bands down. I'm on purple now, taking your single purple, covering the 8 pegs and looping the bottom bands up and over, and you should have 2 loops left per peg after you've looped all the bands up, the bottom bands. And this is row number 9, the purple that we just added. So you should have 2 loops left per peg. Check to make sure. Push all those bands down. I'm going to go a little bit longer. I'm going to make my hat a little longer, more like a Santa's hat where it droops a little bit. I'm going to continue with my 8 rubber bands on my 8 pegs and looping the bottom 2 bands up and over, leaving 2 loops per peg. Again, you can make your hat whatever color you want, even a solid hat, solid color hat, or a Santa one, which is white around the rim and then the rest red, and then a white poofy ball, pom-pom in the end. This is row number 11. push it down. Row number 12. We'll finish our pink and then we'll reduce. So that was row number 12 with 8 pegs and 8 bands. Now we'll reduce to 4 pegs. You can pull your hat up a little. We're taking a single band off of the side first peg now, and it should be attached to the center peg. And we'll move it to the center peg right there. So this one has 3 and this one has 1, and we'll move this one to the center peg like that. And let's do it on the bottom side, on the left side, taking a single band, and it should be attached to the center bottommost peg, and it is. I'm going to move it to this center peg. Now this center peg has 4 loops on it, and we'll move this other band and attaching it to the center peg right there. Let's repeat on the other side, moving a single band, and I see this one's attached to this center peg, and we'll just move it to the center peg right here in the center of our loom, in the middle of our loom. Now this peg has 4 loops on it, and we'll move this single band to the center side peg, which now has 3 loops on it. We'll pull a loop off of this peg, and it's attached to this one, so I'm going to move it to this center side peg, and then moving the other loop off of that one and onto this center bottom peg. So now our bands are on 4 pegs, and it's really stretched out. So I'm going to take the loops off and just moving it down to the center peg so it's closer. So you should have moved 4 loops down 1 peg in the center. Let's move this bottom one also, taking the 4 loops off and then moving it to that peg there. So we're down to 4 pegs for our winter hat. Now for the next row, we're taking 4 single bands, covering the 4 pegs and looping the bottom 4 bands up and over, leaving 2 loops. Let's loop the bottom 4 bands up and over. This is what we should have so far. Let's continue one more row with our purple, taking 4 single purple. We want our hat to be extra floppy. You can stop anytime you want. Should have 2 loops left per peg. I'm going to do a single row of pink. And then I'll add my pom-pom on the top of my hat. So let's make the pom-pom, taking 2 bands at a time. We're going to loop it onto a hook, and I'll do this 4 times. So a total of 8 bands, 2 at a time, and you can make it as big as you want or as small as you want. There's my pom-pom for the top of my hat. I'm taking 2 bands and pulling all those loops onto my 2 bands and then tying a slip knot. Pull it tight. Can fix our pom-pom later. And now let's take our hat off the loom, going to each peg, grabbing the loops onto your hook. So that's what you should have. Grab the 2 slip knot bands off of our pom-pom and then pulling it through those loops. And if you want your hat to be inside out, if you like the hat like this, you can leave it like that and then just reaching in your slip knot and then pulling the slip knot band to add to a pom-pom. But since I don't want to do that, I'll pull my slip knot band over, right now our pom-poms, and then I'm going to flip my hat inside out. I like this side better. Pushing everything through to the other side, the right side out, and we can pull our pom-pom right through the center loops. Right there. Once again, we're going to take that slip knot band, put our hook through where the knot is for a slip knot band and pulling the other side of our slip knot band and kind of loop it over so it doesn't come off to blend in with the top of our hat, our winter hat, and straighten out the bottom of our hat so we don't have any loose bands. So there's our winter hat so far. As you can see on our Barbie, it's a little bit deeper for a better fit. And I'm going to add the little dangling string. If you want to do that, you can follow me. Otherwise, you're done. So to add the bottom dangle on our hat, we're going to put our hook through the bottom 4 loops. There should be 4 of them on our hat, taking 2 single bands and fish it through and just keep going down, adding more bands as you go, and you can make it as long as you want. So I added a total of 10 sets of 2 bands down, making a single chain on the side of my hat. So let's add the pom-poms. I'm taking a single color of each band, looping it once on my hook, and we'll do that 3 times. Single pink, single purple, and looping it once onto our hook. So there's 6 bands total on my hook so far. Taking my slipknot band, doing 2 of them, and pulling all those loops onto that slipknot band, like that. And then let's tie it off. There's the pom-poms. Now let's get our hook through the loops on the end of our hat here, and grabbing the slipknot band for the pom-poms, and then pulling it through. Put our hook through the slipknot band on the pom-poms, like that, and then pulling the other end of the slipknot band right through it to kind of tie itself off. And then we can just blend in that slipknot band to our pom-poms on the dangly part of our winter hat. So that's what it should look like right now. To add the second side, I'm going to take my Barbie, putting the hat on her head so I can see exactly where I want the second dangly part. So this one is right here, so I'm going to go to the other side of her face. I'm going to put it about right there. So putting my hook through the 4 loops. We're going to take 2 single bands and pulling the loops through, getting it onto a hook, and we'll do this a total of 10 times with 2 single bands, creating the second dangly part to our hat. Make it pretty even. Now let's add the second pom-pom, same thing. I'm taking a single band of each, 6 of them, looping it once onto my hook, creating my pom-pom. And if you want a bigger pom-pom at the end of your hat, you can add more bands. I'm only doing 6 of them, and I want them to be pretty even, the loops. Now taking your 2 slipknot bands and pulling those loops onto your hook and tying it off. Once again, put your hook through the loops on the end of our dangly part of our hat, pulling the slipknot band through, put your hook through our slipknot band on the pom-pom side, and grabbing the other end of a slipknot band and pulling it through to tie it off, and then looping the pom-poms in so that way it ties it off. So there are our winter hats. I hope you like them. Thanks for watching.